Welcome to the Powerful Vulnerability Podcast, where we believe in the transformative power of storytelling from the heart. I'm Dr. Ashley.
And I'm Catherine Russler.
We are so glad you're here. Many stories here are extraordinary.
And some carry quiet wisdom.
All teach us. Welcome back to Powerful Vulnerability. Today, we are joined by Emily Barnhardt. Emily is a licensed clinical social worker and a consultant with the Bridging Families Institute at Crossnor Communities for Children, a child welfare nonprofit in North Carolina supporting children and families across the foster care continuum. In her role, she helps lead the expansion of an innovative professional foster parenting model rooted in trauma-informed, family-centered practice and focused on reimagining how families experience the foster care system. Emily holds a BA in sociology from the University of North Carolina at Charlotte and a Master of Social Work from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Throughout her social work career, Emily has worked across clinical and community settings, including roles supporting survivors of human trafficking, sexual and domestic violence, and coordinating multidisciplinary response teams to build collaborative, trauma-informed systems of care. She frequently speaks on topics she cares deeply about, from training National Guard service members on supporting sexual assault survivors to leading college and high school workshops on boundaries, healthy relationships, and violence prevention. In this episode, Emily joins the conversation in a personal capacity to share her own lived experience with grief and loss, not just the loss of loved ones, but the many ways grief shows up across our lives and lives in our bodies over time. Rather than speaking from a professional role, Emily speaks as someone who has intimately known grief, continues to navigate its complexities, and is learning what it means to live honestly and gently alongside it. Welcome, Emily. We are so glad you're here today.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
We're glad you're here.
Yes, we are. Can you first share a bit about why this conversation about grief feels important to have?
Yeah, I've lived with a lot of grief. It's been a through line in my life for a long time, but I haven't always had the language or the space for it. And even though it shaped my life in many ways, I'm realizing that I haven't understood it as deeply as I'm beginning to now. And something I've often said is that I think grief and navigating grief is one of, if arguably not the most universal, deeply human experiences that we have. Yet it can still feel like such an uncomfortable topic in our culture. And that can lead to people feeling isolated and alone in their grief. And so I think it's important to normalize conversations about grief in general. And specifically, I care about normalizing the parts of grief that are quiet, embodied, invisible to others, the parts that we often do carry alone. Mm-hmm. And I think what also feels important in this conversation with what we'll be talking about is just the opportunity to talk about the many ways that grief can show up, that it isn't just about death, how our experience with it can change over time. Mm-hmm. And just vulnerably sharing my own story and using my own experiences to show how different that journey can look for people.
Thank you for being willing to share on such a sensitive topic. I know you lost one of your best friends when you were 24. Can you share a little bit about that experience and who Hannah was to you?
Yeah, I met Hannah when I was coming out of the hardest 2 to 3 years of my life and was really in a process of rebuilding my life and myself. She was also starting a new chapter, so we moved into an apartment and built a home and a life together in Florida. I think anyone who's lived with a roommate who either was already or became, one of your best friends knows how special that experience of living together is. Like waking up to each other, running errands together, goofing off at home, like the little everyday moments of just hilarious happenings and connection, cooking, spontaneous adventures, long talks on the couch or our patio about our day, our lives, our hopes and dreams for the future. There's just that is formed in that situation when you get to live with someone. I remember that being such a gift. Like some of my favorite memories with her were when we would wake up really early and go to Starbucks and then go sit in the sand watching the sunrise on the beach together and just like running around like little kids. You know, she was home to me. Like she was my person that I started over with, that I could fully be myself with, someone who saw me at my messiest and also my strongest, as I did with her. And we celebrated milestones together. We took classes together at the local college, you know, just did life together. And on May 5th, 2014, she died by suicide. And it felt like my world came to a screeching halt. Everything turned upside down. You know, she had been going through a lot, but I had no indication that she was feeling suicidal. I talked to her right before it happened, and she was upset. And I told her I would quickly pay my bill at the restaurant I was at and then come meet up with her to offer support however she needed. But when I tried to call her back about 10 minutes later, she didn't answer. So that was the last time I ever spoke with her. The time period after her death was a blur, but everything changed. You know, I remember how dark and painful and quiet it was sitting in our apartment that month after, like looking at her room and all of her things until I was able to break our lease and move out. In the process of helping her family who lived out of state, like go through her things and figure out what to keep and what to donate or what to throw away, cleaning out her car, you know, taking her books back to school. I don't think there will ever be adequate words to describe what those months following her death were like for me. And looking back, I feel a lot of compassion for myself because that was a lot to go through and deal with at that age.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, you were really young. Like, you talked about essentially being kids together. Actually, you talked about that too. You know, that time after you didn't necessarily get to be a kid, like the
Right.
time frame
Yeah.
when you're
Yeah.
supposed to be a kid, and kind of reclaiming that.
Yeah,
And she was the
yeah, I
person
love
you
that.
reclaimed that with.
It did feel like a reclaiming of that with her. And I think that also added to the grief because it felt like losing that part of me that she brought out in me. And there's just so many layers to loss with grieving the person, what they meant to you, their life, grieving the role they played in your life, and what that meant to you. There's it's so layered.
Yeah. What did that time teach you about what grief actually looks like in real life?
It taught me how messy and unpredictable grief is, that it doesn't follow rules. It's disorienting, it's physical, non-linear, doesn't follow timelines, yours or anyone else's, which can be hard if you feel like people expect you to be doing better than you are at any point in the process. It is also hard to see the world and others around you moving forward when you feel like your world is standing still.
Mhm.
It taught me that grief requires tenderness and freedom, you know, not fixing it because there's really nothing you can do to fix it. There's no getting over it. Like the only way through it is allowing yourself to feel it, and it's something that you have to learn to carry. To describe what it actually looks like, first I have to say that it looks like anything and everything, and it's so unique to the individual and how it comes out, what a grief process looks like. For me, it looked like sobbing uncontrollably over a Grey's Anatomy episode or hyperfixating on random projects. I did a lot of home redecorating, a lot of crafts.
Okay.
There were days where I couldn't get out of bed at all, days where I couldn't stop moving, and days where I felt okay and where I was smiling and I was laughing with friends and able to connect. So there's always that coexistence of laughter and crying and grief as well. Sometimes it looked like having a breakdown in the middle of a bank and just starting to cry in front of everyone. There was a time that I was trying to close our shared utilities accounts and moving out of our apartment, and they wouldn't let me deposit the check because her name was on top of mine on the check. And
Oh,
they kept saying, she has to be here. She has to be the one to deposit it. And I got to the point where I was just like, she can't be here. Like
right.
she died. And then of course, the teller felt so bad and was like, I'll go get a manager. And there's just a lot of moments like that anyone listening who's had a loss can probably hear those examples, and they may not be the same for them, but there's probably similarities of things that resonate. Her death really shattered my my sense of safety and stability in home, and it felt impossible to really know how to process it or make sense of it. To feel haunted by the never ending questions that you never have answers to when you lose someone to suicide. Missing her terribly, feeling sad and angry, feeling her absence, wrestling with guilt and shame of feeling like I failed her. Like, I told myself a lot in that time, like, if anyone should have known, if anyone should have been able to intervene and save her, it should have been me. And that was something I carried for a very long time, of just feeling really responsible. And that was something that was really hard for me to untangle myself from. Over that next year after she died, I slowly started trying to find a new normal, as they say, but I really struggled with that. And I ultimately, I couldn't create a new normal living there. It felt like everywhere I went had memories. And so I started avoiding places, and my world got smaller, and it felt too hard to be there. And so I eventually made the decision to move back to my hometown of Charlotte, North Carolina in 2015.
You started a community for young adults. Can you tell us about that and how that supported you in learning to carry your loss?
Yeah, so after I moved back to Charlotte, I learned about this nonprofit called the Dinner Party. And for anyone who's interested in looking into it before I forget, it's dinnerparty.org. But it's a nonprofit at the time for 20s and 30 somethings, who had experienced some form of significant loss. And it was focused on creating community and connection around life after loss over, regular potluck style dinners. It started with a group of women out in California who all realized that they shared the loss of, like, they shared the experience of losing a dad, and started meeting regularly over dinner to just talk about that
Mm-hmm.
and talk about life after that. And that grew into the Dinner Party, and they now train people all over the world to host dinner party tables in their own communities to create those communities and that space for connection. And since COVID, especially, they have even more offerings and ways that they can connect people with support. So it's a great resource for people to know about if they don't know about it. And at that time, moving back here, I was really craving a space to talk about Hannah. It felt like it was harder to bring her up. It had been enough time that it felt like people had moved on, and I just craved a space to feel understood and for that to be held, because it can be really isolating when you're among the first in your peer group to experience loss that alters your life, and it's hard to not have connection with people who understand that. So I looked into the Dinner Party when I learned about it, and I saw that there was not a table anywhere near me. So I made an impulsive decision to get on a flight and go to a host training in upstate New York that they just happened to be having, like a week or two from when I looked it up. And just went and stayed in some rustic farmhouse for the weekend with a bunch of strangers, and was immediately sold after that weekend on how powerful that was. So I decided to launch it in Charlotte 2016, and it very quickly grew to a capacity where we had to close down the table and work on getting a second one launched, because you have to keep it small enough for it to really have that community feel.
Mm-hmm.
And for about 5 years, a core group of about 10 of us met at my house regularly, monthly, and a little less regularly in the later years. But we met regularly for potluck style dinner parties at my house to talk about loss and life after loss and everything that entails. And it was really an incredible space for me. And also meant a lot to the others at my table. Like, we laughed together, we cried together, we talked about all the little things that people who've experienced loss understand, like not being able to delete their number from your phone, or how you talk about this loss on a date and how far into a date you bring up loss,
Right.
or how far into dating someone. Just the unexpected potholes you fall into, the funny things, the like dark humor around grief and loss. Over those years, hosting that dinner party table really, it changed me in really profound ways. It connected me to my own voice, to my courage, and having conversations that matter. It helped me learn how to carry my grief alongside others and how to engage in rituals around grief that felt healing. If I had to summarize it, it was a space where grief didn't have to be hidden. Like, it normalized all of the conversations we typically avoid, and ultimately taught me that community and connection isn't going to take grief away, but it sure as hell will help you hold it. And that's so important.
So, after that time period, you also experienced multiple losses in a very short period of time, right?
Yeah, it was a year of 2021 to 2022. Within that year, there were four losses that come to mind and felt really significant for me. The first was that first summer in that year, losing a 1.5 year relationship. Then a couple months later, Hannah and I's cat died. It felt like losing like a living piece of her.
Mm-hmm.
And then in February of 2022, my close friend Kendall died. And months later, in July of 2022, another one of my closest friends, Bridget, died from addiction. And I wanted to talk a little more about that loss specifically because the circumstances surrounding it were especially difficult, and it explains why my nervous system, if it wasn't already, just became completely overwhelmed after that.
Mm-hmm.
And so Bridget was one of my best friends. She had the kindest, most beautiful soul. She had a smile and a laugh that were infectious. She was caring and thoughtful of others. She find adventure and fun in any activity. I have a lot of memories with her of just taking spontaneous day trips to just go explore a town
Mm-hmm.
in Florida that we'd never been to, just to check it out and just see what was there. And always, there was always laughter and fun, and she meant a lot to me. We went through a lot together, and I loved her fiercely. Losing her really crushed me, not just because she died, but because of everything that I had been carrying while loving her, worrying about her and hoping for her. I think anyone who has lost a loved one to addiction knows the trauma that can surround that. That culmination of anticipatory grief, the chronic, prolonged grief throughout it, and then the unresolved grief when you lose them, and all of that love, all of that energy, and fighting for them and believing for them, and that hope you've been clinging to for so long for their recovery just kind of feels like it suddenly has nowhere to go.
Yeah.
And so that was a layer around her death that was really difficult. The other piece around losing her that was especially difficult was the fact that it was very public. Bridget was a national, international medal winning American figure skater, and in 2019, Bravely was the first person to publicly accuse her former pair skating partner of sexual abuse. And it was a decision that had significant impact on her life and came with immense pressure and trauma for her. I had known her story and her fight to heal from that trauma for a very long time, well before this came into the public spotlight. And after it all became public, I go downhill even more dealing with the aftermath of it. We kept her death private at first, because it was necessary to just protect her and our privacy, and just having a little space to process and start grieving
Mm-hmm.
before the media found out. And that necessary period of silence also The downside to that is that it added another layer of stress and overwhelm to an already devastating loss. So I was grieving quietly while also carrying a lot of fear and anxiety about when the media attention would come and what that would look like. It kind of felt like a bracing of waiting for that shoe to drop. When the media did find out about 2 months later, it was overwhelming to say the least. Not only was I trying to grieve the loss of one of the most important people to me, but I was also constantly faced with the noise, the media headlines about her death, people's opinions and judgments about Bridget and the case overall, people who didn't know her. And there was a lot of noise and a lot of grief at seeing some of the hurtful things that complete strangers were saying online. And that public aspect of it was something I don't think anyone could ever be prepared for. Her parents shared publicly in that first, USA Today news story that came out about her death that she had struggled with addiction for years as a result of that trauma, the trauma of experiencing sexual abuse. And I echoed their hope that her death would, shed light and bring more awareness to the devastation, like the lasting impact of trauma and sexual abuse specifically. And for me, I think holding that truth of her story alongside those years of loving her, fighting so hard for her, and then losing her was incredibly heavy. Like, especially grieving quietly under the shadow of it being a very public case.
I'm so sorry.
It's something that you can never prepare for any kind of loss. That just feels true. You never know what something's gonna feel like, but the circumstances around that were very, very overwhelming.
How did those losses change your relationship with grief?
It was really an experience of just seeing how compounding losses can really overwhelm our capacity to grieve. Like with Hannah, the grief was devastating, but I had time and community to slowly learn how to carry it. But in 2021 to 2022, those losses came so quickly and some of them were traumatic. And that grief just stopped being something I could sit with. Like the context of that time period also matters. We were still very much dealing with COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And I had started grad school in 2019, to pursue my master's degree in social work and was still in that program. So I was juggling work and internship. And I wasn't able to commit to hosting the dinner party table on top of that anymore. And after 5 years of us meeting regularly, it had naturally come to a meaningful close. We celebrated the 5-year anniversary, and it felt like a natural place to kind of step back from that in the summer of 2021. So right before all of these losses, just with people at our table moving away and starting new chapters in their own life. And because of those external stressors, school and work and the overwhelm of these losses, looking back, there was really a shift from carrying grief to bracing against it and just trying to hold myself together, trying to keep myself together. So it's not that I stopped grieving, it was that I stopped having the space to grieve, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
That absolutely makes sense.
Yeah. What did it feel like to keep functioning when your body and nervous system were so overloaded?
It felt like holding it all quietly, holding my breath, and just thinking, like describing the word bracing, like white knuckling my way through, like really living from the neck up. There was I remember there being a lot of physical tension in my body. On the outside, I was, very high functioning and capable. I was responsible, showing up, fulfilling my commitments. And on the inside, there was the bracing, overwhelm, feeling numb and disconnected from myself and my body.
But I've been listening and thinking how important community is for the grieving process, but that it also takes a lot of time and energy to build it, to create it, to create what you need in terms of community to get
Yeah.
through something like that. And grief happens in periods of life when people don't have time. We don't have time.
Yeah.
Um,
I didn't feel like I could be the leader for that in that time. Like I could have maybe gone to a table, but I didn't have the capacity to lead it.
so, were the tools that helped you in your first major round of grief still available to you in this next round?
Some of them were, but many of them were not. After Hannah's death, some of the coping strategies I leaned on most and felt most supported by were writing and journaling, art, or other creative activities. I did a lot of DIY crafts in my house. Can't claim that they were good, but I was a Hobby Lobby quite a bit. I did a lot of volunteer work, various grief practices, grief rituals that were meaningful, and I was able to really carve out moments of intentionally allowing myself to really sit with grief, listening to songs that spoke to how I felt, or looking at photos of Hannah and I letting myself cry. After Kendall and Bridget's death and the other losses that year, many of those coping strategies felt inaccessible to me emotionally, especially writing, journaling, art, creative things. I would sit down to try and there was just nothing there. I just couldn't access it. I felt too overwhelmed and was just in a constant state of stress, juggling grad school and work and other commitments. There were moments of sitting with grief, of course, but I had a hard time doing it intentionally. It was more that there was an unexpected wave of grief that would come crashing through, and I didn't really have a choice but to sit with it. But it would usually kind of close up pretty quickly. So it felt confusing to have previously got to a place after losing Hannah where I felt I had grown really comfortable with grief and really felt like I had learned to carry it, and then to have these additional losses and suddenly find myself unable to really access or lean into my grief at all. And I think that is important to share because sometimes the tools that work for us in the past don't work for us later, and that's okay. And it's a process of figuring out what does. I think I started realizing that my body was really carrying what my mind hadn't been able to touch yet over the last couple of years. And it wasn't until the last 2 years that I really started going back and trying to process all this grief, not just over death, but other life experiences, like grief related to other life experiences as well.
Let's talk about that a little bit. Grief definitely isn't only about death. Can you share what else grief looked like for you in other parts of your life over the last few years?
Yeah, I think I'll share one of the biggest examples just from the past 2 years. Last year, I was very unexpectedly contacted by a prosecutor in another state and invited to give a statement against someone who raped me 15 years ago. I had not seen or faced him since the night it happened, and within days of being contacted about it, I was in a virtual courtroom facing him, saying what he did and how it affected me, for the first time, and saying those words out loud in court. So then learning that he would not only be released from jail, but also was being allowed to move across the country here to the city I live in to that court hearing.
Oh,
I'm kind of laughing because it was so unreal and brought up an enormous amount of grief. Just grief for like that whole process of doing that brought up a lot of grief for my younger self and how much that experience shaped me.
hmm
Grief around justice and losing a sense of safety and control that I had previously had, and having physical distance from him
hmm
and feeling, the violation of him moving here, and just grief over experiencing in real time, seeing how much came up in my body through that experience, like how much my body has been holding around that trauma all of these years. And saying that, it also feels important to make space for saying that I don't regret it. It was not the outcome I would have hoped for, but I don't regret doing it. I made the decision to do that, to face him for myself and my own healing, and for every survivor who isn't believed because I believed initially. And it was an important and deeply powerful moment in my own healing. And there was also profound grief around that.
In the grief of and disappointment, and a system asked you to do to risk yourself to support the system creating justice for survivors, and then turned around and didn't protect you after asking so much of you. That's a lot to carry in and of itself.
Yeah, and the feelings are complicated too. The prosecutor I worked with was incredibly supportive and very validating, and it felt like she really gave me a gift in fighting for me and believing that this story mattered and would be helpful and needed to be heard. And as you said, limitations and just challenges with the justice system, there's the whole spectrum of emotion around that.
Believe me, I know.
Yeah, and I also at the time was doing some of that multidisciplinary work with sexual and domestic violence. So it hit very close to home and that was a whole other layer of trying to deal with that when I was currently working in that system.
Yeah.
And so then there was also grief and having to step away from work that I cared very deeply about, partially in order to just protect myself and be able to best take care of myself. But there was grief in stepping away from that, even though I knew that it was the right decision. And I'm so deeply grateful to have landed in another job that I love at an incredible nonprofit I love, and I feel so inspired by my work, which is such a gift. And I know that it worked out the way it needed to, but there's still grief in that.
I feel
What kinds
that.
of grief do you think often go unnamed or unacknowledged for people in all this that you've gone through?
Yeah, too many to name, but using just this example that we're currently talking about, I would say, some of the kinds of grief that often go unnamed or could be grief around trauma, grief for loss, safety, and control, grief for the self that you were before a trauma or a loss, grief over time lost, which can mean many different things for people, but even just time lost before finding the right kind of support you need. Uh, Grief around identity or career changes or career related loss, like having to step away from a job or losing a job, grief around relationships ending, really any grief without ritual or permission. Like if there isn't a language or ritual for it, people often don't call it grief, but our body experiences it as grief still. And if those around us or our society doesn't recognize or acknowledge certain grief experiences, then it can be more challenging for people to acknowledge and name that themselves and to validate how much that matters.
Someone told me after my divorce that you are allowed to grieve the life that you thought you were going to have. That really helped me a lot because I didn't think of it as grief at all. And then it was like, oh, this makes so much sense. And I feel like a lot of those situations that you just named, I mean, that's essentially what it is, whether it's a career change or, you physically lose someone, you lose this life that you thought you were going to have with that person or with that job or with that relationship. And it's hard to lose those future dreams that you have.
I went through a divorce many years ago now, and I remember, as you said, when you go through something before a lot of your peers do, that you don't necessarily have anybody naturally in the vicinity to talk about it. But I remember experiencing a lot of grief and being really surprised at how much grief there is around it.
Yeah.
There was for me, even when you know it's the right decision for you.
Correct.
That almost
Yeah.
makes it more confusing.
Well, and those can both be true. Like something like stepping away from that job for several reasons, but but this was very much a part of that. And knowing that I needed to give myself space to work through this and to not be constantly faced with doing that work also every day. Also, just ethically as a therapist, I knew that I needed to also take that space to work on myself, to make sure that all of my energy during that time was focused on really showing up for my clients and making sure that what I was going through was not interfering. But there got to the point that I was like, I know that I need to step away from this right now. And the examples that you both are sharing too, like that for me, stepping away from work, sometimes I think in those experiences we may not feel like we have permission to really say to friends or to supports, I'm grieving this.
Yeah.
Like we might feel dramatic saying that. Or if we do say that, we might feel afraid that there could often be a reaction of, yeah, of course, but then people expect that grief is a short window when really like there's not a timeline. Grief isn't something that you just it's not a checklist that you move through, and once you move through that checklist, you're done. It's not like a coat that you take off, you wear while you're grieving, and then you take it off and put it in a closet. It's something that you absorb, that you carry, and it shifts over time.
It's part of you. Over the past 2 years, you've been on a deeply personal journey of working with grief in your body. Can you tell us what that looked like for you?
Yeah, what it looked like in my life, leading up to starting to do some deeper work was it started to look like stuckness, realizing that grief and trauma was stored in my body and not knowing how to access it. Like I was trying, but I wasn't successful in figuring out how to access it. I just vacillated between feeling, numb, feeling emotionally dysregulated, all the while still like high functioning and responsible and showing up for all of my commitments. And I had been in therapy throughout these years, and it's something I really believe in and think everyone should have the ability and the access to
Yeah.
therapy.
Yeah.
And I began exploring some different approaches, really getting into somatic bodywork approaches, just trying to get in my body. Somatic meaning like body based. I had a somatic experience that really unlocked how much was being held in my body. And my body, after that point, just started demanding to be listened to. Like one example, I remember remembering this memory and kind of being like, wow, I haven't thought about this since that day. During Bridget's funeral, I remember it vividly. Like I'm still standing, I could picture it. And we were standing during the service. I remember my entire body was shaking so hard that for so much that it obviously was visible because I remember feeling someone put their hands on me. And I remember having that memory of that moment of shaking so hard because the depth of the grief and the pain was so intense that I felt like it was taking all my energy to hold myself together and not cause a scene. And looking back at that memory, it's like, where did that go? Right? Like where I held myself together through the service, and then we went on to do things after. But where did that response, that survival response in my body that came up, where did that grief go? Where did all of that go? And I started asking myself these questions and really started working on embodiment, learning to be in my body more, listen to it at a new depth that I never had before, working with my nervous system instead of just trying to manage it. It's so trendy to talk about regulation, like grounding and regulation. And that is important. That is key and crucial. I think sometimes people, myself included, have easily approached that from a management perspective. What the work I've been trying to do is really getting under that and learning to listen to it and be in it and understand it at a depth I never have before. Just working with sensation and movement and allowing somatic expression of what's really there learning to let it move instead of managing it.
For the somatic work that you're doing, do you have to work with a professional, or are there smaller daily practices that a person can establish at home?
That's a great question. So I kind of see that question in two different pieces. So first, no, you don't have to work with a somatic professional, a somatic oriented professional, though it is a wonderful resource and I would highly recommend that if that's the kind of work that you're wanting to do. And I also recognize that that isn't always accessible to people or they might not be ready for that yet. So there are daily practices that I do and there's daily practices that anyone can do if the goal is to learn to connect to your body more. It can start with something as small as sitting for 2 minutes and kind of turning your attention inward and taking deep breaths and seeing what shows up in your body. Like, do you feel hot or cold? Is there pain? Is there anything that you can sense, and just being curious about it, not making judgments about it, not trying to overanalyze it, but just that practice of sitting with yourself and learning kind of what that inner landscape feels like and looks like and what language it speaks. Journaling can be an easy way to kind of prompt for someone. You could have prompts that you're asking yourself every day of what do I feel in my body today? What is it trying to tell me? Like, do I know? And just making an attempt. You don't have to know right away what that answer is, but it is something that the more you practice it, the more you'll start to connect. And what I will also say, just because, I know we don't have all the time in the world, is that we live in an age where we have a wonderful thing called Google. And I know for a fact that there's a lot out there that is accessible through searching. So if someone wanted to go to Google and look for somatic practices to help you connect with your body, there's a lot of resources out there for people if this is something someone wants to explore, because I hesitate. I offered two examples of so many options, and we're all so different that some things might work for me that work for someone else. And so I really would empower people to go do some research and also connect with a professional, because that can be a really, really great support to have if that's the work you want to do. And if you have a history of trauma, look for someone trauma informed that has experience working with trauma, because that knowledge is really important in working with the body.
Is the somatic work something that you're working with and learning about right now, or could you say that has been revolutionary for your body and your process?
Both. It's something that's been profound in a way that I've struggled to find words for, and it's a journey I'm still on. I'd say like the last 2 years is when I've really been working on this, and it's just been a deeper layer of work. I've done a lot of work on myself over the years, but this is the deepest and the most meaningful layer of work that I've done.
What have you learned about how grief lives in the body?
I learned the hard way that deferred grief, compounding grief, will eventually demand attention. Same is true for trauma. Like, even when my mind wanted to move on, my body was still holding and carrying those unfinished pieces. And when grief doesn't have space, it shows up as symptoms, which look different for everyone, but can manifest even physically in sleep disruption, chronic pain and tension, exhaustion, and burnout. Most importantly, I think in leaning into the knowing that grief needs expression, not just insight and intellectual understanding. Leaning into that knowing, I've learned how honestly sacred and vulnerable that work feels. Like, the fact that grief and our lived experiences live in our body is really a gift. It lives in the body to preserve our truth and the truth of what we've lived through. It tells the story of what we've suffered, what we care most deeply about, and to learn to listen to it, to sit with it, and allow it to move and express itself the way that it needs and wants to get out of our own way, so to say.
Yeah.
It's kind of a remembering, like a remembering of bringing those fragmented pieces of ourselves back together. At least that's how it's felt for me. It feels like witnessing my body tell a story that I haven't heard before, like my story.
Mm-hmm.
It's the honest truth and primal expression of how it felt to be me in those moments, like during those losses, during the things that I've experienced. And it is hard to find a way to adequately describe what it feels like to witness yourself like that. It's been very hard work and sometimes very exhausting, and also, I think, one of the most beautiful experiences of my life I've had.
I'm sitting here crying listening to you because it feels so true to me, and so I don't know how to jump in with a question. So Ashley, you may wanna.
Okay.
I love that you just said that. I mean, it's a beautiful example of how we connect with each other when we're open at this level, and how when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, that part of why I wanted to do this podcast is because even though I'm struggling to find the words for this process, it feels like someone might want to hear it, or someone might need to hear it, or it could mean something to someone
Yeah.
to share.
Oh, it's been good for me sitting here listening to you too. It's been really helpful.
That means a lot.
Yeah.
It's
Over.
painful for me too.
It is.
I think the only thing I wanted to say to summarize all of that is I have learned how important it is to really understand the body's wisdom and knowing how to heal itself when it has the room to, and when we give it the room to, and really seeing the limits and the cost of trying to manage it and trying to be strong all the time, and not taking the space and the slowness and the quiet needed to do this kind of work. I have seen that my body knew what is true this whole time about the things that I've experienced before I had the words to describe it. And some of it I still don't have words for yet, and I'm honestly not sure that I ever will. And that also feels like something that feels very special about this, that it's something that I'm not sure there's ever going to be language for. But I've learned that I'm learning to listen, no matter how painful it is, and bring relief and an opening and integration within ourselves in a way that just understanding something mentally and intellectually can't alone.
It's like when you manage, you're just shutting everything off,
Mhm.
dissociating. But when you open up for all the really hard stuff to flow, it's like that's when the
So, I was gonna say it's so hard to let yourself do. It's so much easier to just stay in your lane and worry about what you're supposed to be doing, where you're supposed to be, and not giving yourself that time to really fully process the grief. It's so important.
There's a quote, I wish I could remember who said it, but it is quoted in a book by Dr. Hilary McBride.
Mm-hmm.
And I also wanted to mention there's a book called Wisdom of Your Body by Dr. Hilary McBride that I would really highly recommend for anyone who's interested in stepping into this work. But there's a quote, she quotes something along the lines of, every time we sweep an emotion under the rug, we sweep it right into our nervous system. And that felt really profound for me.
Yeah. Yeah. How has this journey shaped the way you show up for yourself and for others?
Also, something that feels very hard to put into words and to summarize. I think the first thing that comes to mind is just self-compassion and honestly tenderness. Like I'm so much more gentle with myself than I've ever been in my life. And what that's looked like is really, really prioritizing myself more and in different ways than I have before. Like giving myself space and privacy when I need it, being really intentional with my time and my resources, and for myself and others, prioritizing presence over fixing, and permission to go slowly, to never be done, to not have it all together, to still be figuring things out, and to always be a human that is growing and will have new layers to work on in the future.
Yeah. I love that.
if someone is listening, or if someone listening is carrying grief they haven't had space to process, what would you want them to hear?
I would want them to hear that wherever you are in your journey, nothing is wrong with you. There was a lot of work that I needed to do to get me to this place where I could do the work that I'm doing now. And everyone's journey looks different. There is no timeline for this, so you're never failing. I want them to hear that your body is wise and it has successfully protected you and your survival so far because you're sitting here listening to this. So go slowly, be gentle with yourself. Know that you don't have to carry this alone, whatever this is. If it's grief, if it's trauma, you don't have to carry it alone. There are spaces like the dinner party and people that you can find community with that won't take it away but can help you hold it. And last, just reiterating what I've learned to be true, which is that grief changes shape when it finally has room. We can learn to give it the space that it needs.
Thank you, Emily, for being here with us today and sitting with us in your powerful vulnerability. I know you touched my heart.
Thank you for having me. This conversation means a lot.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for sitting in powerful vulnerability with us today. I'm Dr. Ashley.
And I'm Catherine.
Make sure to like, follow, and subscribe to the podcast as your preferred app allows.
See you on the next episode.